I think it's really important when thinking about being a sports fan to be cognizant of recency bias and just as importantly to not allow your current state emotions to cloud your better judgment, the bigger picture, no matter how hard that can be as a fan of Bears football. Because God knows it will evoke all types of negative emotions out of you. But it's ultimately what you were indoctrinated into and you continue to sign up for. God only knows why. Same question I've asked myself for a long, long time. And when it comes to the Bears, there have been a couple of good to great coaches, the ones that stand out the most. You got George Papa Bear Hallis, obviously, Mike Ditka, and certainly in the good category, you've got to go with Lovie Smith, right? He's not on the Ditka or Hallis tier, but he comfortably clears most every other head coach in Chicago Bears history, especially more modern Bears history, right? The one thing we are familiar with when it comes to the Bears is bad head coaches. We know them because we've seen them so many times. And while there are a lot of bad head coaches, even just in my lifetime, you've got the Wansteads and the Nagys. They were bad. Duran was bleh. They all had fleeting moments of success. That means they were bad, but it wasn't brutal and god-awful from beginning to end. You've got a certain tier of the worst of Chicago Bears head coaches that we all have to agree on because it's just basic reality. Abe Gibron, Mark Trestman, John Fox. Like, if you're thinking about Chicago Bears Mount Rushmore of shittiest head coaches in organization history, it's those three guys, and you might have made an argument in the past for somebody like a Jim Dooley. However, that shit could bump because you now have a clear, unquestioned fourth member of that Chicago Bears Mount Rushmore of worst head coaches in team history, and that is Matt Eberflus. And if we're being really honest here, there has never been one as bad as him. And I know you'll look at this and say, this is the emotion getting me caught up in the moment. This is recency bias, blah, blah, blah. I get that perspective, but it is flawed and flat out wrong. It is. And I'm going to talk about why here in a moment. This guy sucks on an unprecedented level, even in the history of Bears football. And I feel like this is an example of where in 2 months, everybody's probably going to agree with this take. So I'd rather be first with it and be ahead of the curve. Because the way this season is trending and heading, the Bears might not win another game. Or even if they only win one more or two more. You're talking about him finishing somewhere between 4-13 in year 3 to 6-11. I mean, if we're being really realistic here, at that point in time, that should remove any and all doubt. But frankly, I don't think there should be a doubt now. And when I posted this on Twitter, I said, Matt Eberflus is the worst head coach in Chicago Bears history. Changed my mind. The reaction has been insightful and very interesting, and I've certainly seen some common themes and common names come up, and I referenced 3 of them in terms of the Mount Rushmore of worst coaches in team history. It's Gibron, Fox, Trestman. Those are the names I was most commonly seeing being thrown out. So let's talk about them, why they were so bad, and then, most importantly, talk about why Matt Eberflus clears them on the Bears football suckdar. Let's start with Abe Gibron. The era Sandsabelt slacks. Oh, my God. He was terrible, right? His 3 years in Chicago from 72 to 74, he finished 11-30-1. That's a .274 winning percentage, worst of any relatively tenured head coach in Bears history. However, context matters here, and so much of this conversation has to deal with the context. When you look back at those teams from 72 to 74, by the time 72 came around, Gale Sayers was gone. Dick Butkus, even though he was named a Pro Bowler that year, was really a shell of himself, and he retired in 73. You had Bobby Douglas and Gary Huff as your two-headed monster at quarterback. What the hell was Gibron going to do with that? You had 2 years with no Pro Bowlers on this team in 73 and 74, which is indicative not so much of just bad coaching by Gibron, and he certainly was a bad coach, a bad head coach. It is George Halas and the organization and just how bad it had gotten from a talent evaluation standpoint, which is why later on in 74, Jim Finks was hired, and he ended up being the architect of what eventually would become the 85 Bears and one of the most iconic teams in NFL history, blah, blah, blah. So let me be clear. Abe Gibron will, at least at this time, be well entrenched on that Mount Rushmore of worst Bears head coaches. But the context matters here. Even a great head coach with those Bears rosters in the mid-70s would have only been able to do so much. He was bad, but that to me doesn't mean that he's the worst one ever. And then we look at John Fox. And I was all over this at the time, for those that have followed me and watched me for a long time. It was a stupid hire. It was back then. It is now. It always will be. He was going to be on his third pass. The Broncos, who had Peyton Manning, couldn't wait to get rid of him after yet another playoff collapse. I should have told you all you know, especially when they hired Gary Kubiak, that 2015 season, the Broncos went on to win the Super Bowl. You could say, well, that was because of the defense of Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware. Fair points. However, point remains, they had the defensive-minded head coach, and they couldn't get it done, and they kept coming up short in the playoffs. I can't believe anybody would have ever thought this would have worked. But, of course, the brass of the Bears did, because Bears football, because Ernie Accorsi, that was his boy, and he was part of the fucking process, because that's what dumb dick organizations do. They go to outside consultants to have major sway and influence over the head coaching decisions. Like, they keep doing this shit. It's what helped result in the Eberflus hire. Like, stop fucking doing stupid things. Fox was terrible in Chicago. You could tell he was a guy just riding out the string, trying to get himself a fat paycheck. No hate to him. Do what you got to do, but fuck you too. He was 14 and 34 in his 3 years with the Bears between 2015 to 2017. A .292 winning percentage. But let's be honest here. He came on the heels of the Trestman era. These were the end days of Cutler, which there were never any really great days with Cutler anyways. And it was only at the beginning of the Trubisky failure. This was a team going through transition. They wasn't going to do much of them. Like, if you look at those rosters honestly and objectively from 2015 to 2017, they were kind of riding out the string and then realizing they needed to bottom out. How much better was he really going to do? I mean, honestly, he was bad. One of the worst. But worst ever? I don't know about that. Another name I saw thrown out a lot, and when we talk about recency bias, it's been a few years, certainly, but it ain't been that long, and that's Mark Trestman. And I kind of laugh at this one because, objectively, he sucked. He was terrible. He was so bad he only lasted 2 years. That's god-awful. But he was also 13 and 19 with a .406 winning percentage. He went 8 and 8 in his first season. The 2013 offense between Jay Cutler and then the better Josh McCown that year, absolutely true. Go look it up. That offense was elite. I think they were like second in the league in points scored and like 7th or 8th in total yardage. They were one blown coverage on 4th and long against the Packers away in the last week of the season from a division title and a playoff appearance, for Christ's sakes. Eberflus has nothing close to that on his resume. And I know a lot of people look at 2014 and how quickly and badly that season went downhill. And yes, it was bad. Those losses mid-season, the Patriots before the bye week where they gave up over 50 points, and coming out of the bye, getting slaughtered by the Packers where they scored over 50 points. Those were embarrassing, but it's also worth remembering the Bears technically came back and they won their next 2 games before the bottom fell out and they lost their last 5 that year. You also look at that 2014 team, and I remember going on like a Chicago radio station before the season, and the local hosts were kind of poo-pooing me when I told them, like, this is going to be a 6-10 team. They're old. They're bad. Like, no. Like, they're not going to recover from that loss. It's just not happening. And when you look at that roster in 2014, even a great coach probably only wins 8 or 9 games. So when you look at that context, and again, the context is so important. Mark Trestman, bad, yes. Historically bad, yes. worst head coach in Chicago Bears history? Bump it. Fuck no. Not even close. That honor has been rightfully earned and will only continue to be entrenched by Matt Eberflus. When you look at him current state, a little over 2.5 years into his regime, he's 14-30 with a .318 winning percentage. So way below Trestman. I don't even know how that's a fucking conversation. Certainly, technically a little bit better than Fox and Gibron. So like if you want to throw those two out there, that I could understand. Like I don't understand the Trestman shit as much. Yeah, it ended bad, but there was at least some good. For Gibron and for Fox, there was never any fucking good. Let's be really clear about that. And the way this team is playing right now and looking, they might not win another game, or they might win one game or two more games, and that's it, especially when you look at the schedule they have remaining. And let's just entertain for a moment the thought that this Bears team loses the remaining games on their schedule. How likely is that? Is it possible? Absolutely. At that point in time, that would give him a .274 winning percentage, which would tie him with Abe Gibron. In just over 2.5 years, he is on his third offensive coordinator, and technically, if you want to classify him after Alan Williams resigned for reasons, Matt Eberflus was really the defensive coordinator, and now you have another one. He's on his third defensive coordinator in 2.5 years, folks. That's more than a coordinator a fucking season. And when you want to talk about Trestman's offense of 2013 in relation to Eberflus's defense of 2024, Trestman's offense clears this defense this year by quite a bit. Not up for debate because it's true and all the statistics have backed that up. But again, the context is what really matters here, folks. Matt Eberflus came in because Ryan Poles was a fucking idiot and allowed himself to get punked into hiring a defensive-minded guy when the most important thing should have been the development of Justin Fields. Eberflus did everything that he could to stifle any possible development of Justin Fields, any chance that he had to be a successful NFL starting quarterback with the Chicago Bears. Period. Full stop. And everything he's done this year has created an environment and a situation where he's doing his absolute worst to try and sabotage and submarine any hope of development and potential for Caleb Williams to become a big-time star quarterback in the fucking NFL. Abe Gibron didn't have that. John Fox didn't have that. Mark Trestman didn't have that. Fucking Matt Eberflus does. That's a pretty big fucking deal here, folks. He's about to finish last in the NFC North for the second time in 3 seasons. And when you look at 2023, the one time his team didn't finish last in the division, they finished fucking third. They're going to take the North Cellar and never give it back. And then, again, when you look at the bigger context, look at some of the other head coaches that were hired in that same cycle of the 2022 offseason. It included Kevin O'Connell. How great it is to watch him in Minnesota in the same fucking division. Do competent things because he knows fucking offense. Mike McDaniel, some of the things he's done with that offense in Miami. You even look at some of the other guys, and Dennis Allen's been fired, and Lovie Smith was fired. Thank you, Lovie. You bit the bullet. You took one for the Bears. Nathaniel Hackett was god-awful, right? I get that. Josh McDaniels totally sucked dong. But even guys like Brian Daboll and Doug Peterson, hot seat, on their way out type of guys, even they, at some point during their tenures with their teams, made the playoffs, won a playoff game. Matt Eberflus's biggest success story was winning a few meaningless games at the end of the last season to finish 7-10. Give me a fucking break. It was totally realistic to have the standards or expectations for this team to win 10 or 11 games. With the amount that was invested on the skill players on offense, the amount that was invested on the defense over the past couple of years, and if he's supposed to be such a brilliant defensive mind, it could lead to certainly a lot of Bears football, but they can't even fucking do that right. They're going to fall woefully short of that. This is not a team that's just slightly failing up to live up to expectations. They are significantly underperforming against them. This was supposed to be the no bullshit, no more excuses. You've got to show dramatic improvement, and instead they're showing fucking regression. What the hell are we talking about here? At this point, the Chicago Bears of 2024 are closer to the tanking version of this team in 2022 than last year's version. Like, full stop. You look at the failure with the coordinators that have been hired, the best attempts to actually ruin one young quarterback's development and doing everything you can to ruin the second one. The other head coaches that were hired that would have been better fits, that would have been focused on the offensive side of the ball, that either A, could have gotten more out of Justin Fields, or certainly B, at a minimum, given you a better opportunity to get the most you could out of Caleb Williams. His defense having never been elite, even with all the investment that's been placed on that side of the fucking ball, the piss poor winning percentage that is only going to get worse, folks, as the season rolls along. For all of those reasons and so many more, you look at the games that this team has lost and how much it's come down to bad coaching decisions. The Packers game. Why aren't you trying to get closer? For a field goal kicker that you know is really good when you get closer, but has a low ball trajectory off his foot, why are you trying to have him kick an almost 50-yarder? Washington, why are you allowing them to get a free 15 yards to set up the Hail Mary and then acting like that didn't matter? That made all the fucking difference in the world, you dumb dick. You could look at so many games over the past 2.5 seasons where you could directly point to coaching and say, it's the lack of brain power on that Bears sideline that has cost this team time after time after fucking time. The piss poor record, the stunting of young quarterback development. I could go on and on and on. I just happen to be right about this and first about this. Matt Eberflus, folks, is the worst head coach in Chicago Bears history. And you either accept that fact now or watch as he proves that out over the next several weeks like he hasn't already over the past 2.5 years. He is the worst ever. He will have the most prominent spot on the Chicago Bears Mount Rushmore of worst head coaches in team history. Argue with a wall.